Whoever said you can't turn a hoe into a housewife? Run me my money. Look at me. Shrimp, some pasta, laundry being folded, children being taken care of, dishes loaded into the dishwasher. I'm beating the statistics. Praise me. I mean, I also was a teen mom and have 2 baby daddies, but like, everybody has their flaws.
In 2010, 27% of children were being raised in single-parent homes, and there's every indication 13 years on that the figure's going to be a lot higher. In my country, Australia, the rate of increase keeps doubling every 5 years. And in both countries, for single-parent households, 80% of the time, it's a mother. On an individual level, I'm not judgmental. Being a parent is not easy, and I applaud anyone who's putting in the effort. But it should not be controversial to say that any rise in single-parent households and single motherhood sucks. If we're a society that has the best interests of children in mind, then this trend is not good. Having 2 loving parents is obviously better than having 1 loving parent. There are practical reasons for that, because when you've got 2 people, it's easier to prevent parent burnout, but it's also 2 different dynamic people to bring their own unique interests to enrich that child's life. For heterosexual couples, it's the masculine and the feminine. Maybe one parent likes reading books and doing craft activities with their children, while the other one likes being outside, hiking in nature, playing music. Children benefit from having a lot of adults around who love them and pay them attention. The nuclear family as we know it is already a huge downgrade in terms of what's best for children. We did not evolve to live in the suburbs. We evolved to live in tribes. Back in the day, you'd have children running around with 100 different adults that all know their name. You got mum and dad, of course, but you've also got aunts, uncles, and cousins and grandparents. There would have been a huge variety of social interaction and lots of different attachment figures, and so shrinking that down to just mum and dad was already a huge downgrade. To shrink that even further to just 1 parent, that's a big compromise in terms of what's best for that child. Again, I'm not hating on the individual single parents. That's not what this is about, but I am trying to make the point that as a culture, we're way too blasé about this trend. And honestly, the reason is because we're selfish. Like, that's it. We've gotten way too self-involved. We focus on the happiness, the importance of the happiness of adults and not on children. And that's easy to do because children are small and they're practically voiceless, whereas an adult can assert their needs with a lot more strength. When you look at a couple that's getting divorced, it's very rare to hear the best interests of the child as the prime importance in making that decision. No, it's about what's best for mum, what's best for dad. And look, sometimes divorce is the best option because the relationship is just that toxic and it's not good for the child to be around that. But often mum and dad splitting up is way worse for the child because the parents are just too lazy to actually work through some conflict resolution, to actually seek couples therapy, to compromise a little bit. No, instead we'll just break up the family, force you to go from this house to that house, or even worse, just shut one parent out forever. We have this kind of odious me kind of culture at the moment where we don't value sacrificing for the sake of the people that we love. It's all about me, what's right for me, like living my truth, and I deserve to be happy and comfortable. I mean, it's hard to argue with that, but as an adult, I think you grow to understand that your happiness isn't always the most important thing, that sometimes you have to negotiate and compromise because what's best for you might conflict with what's best for somebody else. And when it comes to romantic relationships between men and women, it just seems to me as though the best interests of the children often get forgotten, or even worse, exploited. One of the worst lines, I absolutely hate hearing this, is that I'm breaking up this relationship. I'm divorcing your father for your sake. I'm doing it for you, for your best interests. I'm giving you a positive role model. I'm showing you an example of someone who values themselves. I'm being a good role model to you to show you what it looks like to be an empowered woman, to put your happiness first. It's such a bullshit rationalization. In so many cases, you're not actually helping the kid by denying him a father. How about instead you be the role model by providing an example of what a mature, responsible adult looks like? Someone who understands that the children are blameless and suffers and sacrifices and works hard for their best interests rather than just selfishly putting your own needs first and then using them as a prop to rationalize your terrible choices. It really disgusts me when women do this, when they can't take responsibility for their own decisions because they're too cowardly, and so they deflect that responsibility onto somebody else. There were some really painful examples of that in my course if you want to see that play out in real life situations with real women. But I understand if so far in the video I might be coming across as a little bit harsh and a little bit judgmental. You know, Alexander, why are you pretending like this is a simple issue? This is very nuanced. I get that, and I understand why the culture is reluctant to bring up the best interests of the children when talking about the dynamics between mum and dad. It's because we're very reluctant to use a mother's love for her children as a reason to guilt and shame her into staying in a relationship that's toxic and abusive. And that's actually legitimate. Like in those individual circumstances where that applies, that's fair enough. I wouldn't want to do that. It would be a really horrible thing to do, to hold a mother's love hostage and say something like, if you really loved your children, then you'd just tolerate this abuse. But at the same time, I am so sick of the narrative that the reason why there are so many single mothers out there is because there is this epidemic of abusive men. At best, it's a massive oversimplification. At worst, it's grossly sexist and wrong. And it's frustrating because it's not even close to being the whole story. This myth that the reason why there are so many single mothers out there is because men are terrible and it's all men's fault has got to stop. All the reasons why men are getting the blame for this, women are equally at fault. So let's start with abuse, the one that everybody talks about. Well, the relationship is too toxic to continue, so we had to split up the family. Okay, yes, that is real, but that is not gendered. You cannot blame that on men. To do so is incredibly sexist. Some individual men, absolutely, but not men as a whole. Women are just as likely to be as abusive as men. They're not special. They're not above it. If you want proof of how abusive and toxic women can be, you should check out my inbox for Hey Hero. Every week, guys writing to me asking for advice on how to handle this awful relationship with a woman who's abusing them. Honestly, some of the stories I've heard will make you feel sick. I know that that's just anecdotal evidence, but as far as I know, there's never been any research to suggest that men are more likely than women to be abusive inside romantic relationships. If anybody's seen a study that would suggest that, please post it in the comments section. Acting abusive towards your partner is not gendered. Both men and women can be absolutely awful. To suggest that abuse inside relationships is a male issue, it's a male problem, is just wrong. It's sexist. And people always point to violence, like, oh, look at the statistics on domestic violence. Look how many women had to go to hospital. Yeah, there are a bunch of scumbag men out there, and because we're men, we tend to be stronger than women, so if things become violent, it tends to be that the woman gets hurt. But what you're seeing there are heavy consequences, not heavy frequency of occurrence. The research shows that in relationships that do feature violence, it's most likely to be reciprocal, which means that both the man and the woman are violent with each other. The research also shows that in the instance that it's not reciprocal, that it's just one partner being violent towards the other partner, it's actually men in the minority. 70% of the time, it's the woman who is violent. So my point is that you can't blame the fact that there are abusive, toxic relationships out there at the feet of men, and that's why there are so many single mothers. For as many women out there who are fearing for their safety and having to get away from abusive men, there are just as many men who are victims of women and having to flee for their own safety. Well then, what about casual sex? What about all these men who are out there having one-night stands and not using protection, not using condoms, getting women pregnant and then just running off? That's men's fault. Nope. Birth control is the responsibility of both genders. You cannot blame that one on men, and while it is insane to me that there are men who are so casual about the possibility of getting a woman pregnant that they are having one-night stands without protection, it is doubly insane to me that there are women out there having unprotected sex. Like, nobody should be casual about this, man or woman, but women, you're the ones who are actually getting pregnant, who are going to be there with the child. You actually have to grow the baby. You should be taking birth control very, very seriously. It has big consequences for you. And that's not me letting men off the hook. I'm not an advocate of male promiscuity. I don't tell men that there's happiness to be found in casual hookups and unprotected sex. Like, I get it. I understand. I'm a man too. You've got this male sex drive. But what I'm trying to convince guys to do is to channel all of that energy in a much more productive focus and direction. As a man, it is your job to tame that instinct. But with regards to women, I cannot understand how feminism hoodwinked women into believing that promiscuity and casual sex was somehow empowering for them. It's some kind of opposite land. The world has gone completely crazy. You've got some women with this crazy value system that encourages them to continue to sleep with all the men that they're seeing until somebody brings up that exclusivity, are we in a monogamous committed relationship talk. The wisdom and ethics of continuing to sleep with other people until you have the official talk is the subject of my latest Patreon video. You can check that out here. But my point is that if there are children out there who are being born to parents who just hooked up casually and didn't use protection, that is not exclusively the man's fault. That is equally the woman's fault. If you are absolutely determined to excuse women from any responsibility for the rise in single motherhood and place all the blame on men, the best thing that you can point to are those situations where a man simply can't hack the responsibility, and so he leaves. He made promises and he doesn't keep them. The relationship isn't abusive or toxic, he just freaks out at the responsibility and he's feeling selfish, he doesn't want to sacrifice that much, and so he takes off. If your ultimate aim is to place the blame on men, those are the situations you should be pointing to. It does take a lot to be a father. You have to be there every single day. You have to show up. You have to protect, to provide, to be a role model. It's a lot of responsibility, and a lot of men can't live up to it. It's one of the cruel ironies of our biology that it basically takes no maturity or responsibility to create children. Anybody can have sex, but the consequences of that sex in terms of creating new life requires an enormous amount of responsibility. So yeah, there's a bunch of immature men out there who are having sex, creating children, but are not taking responsibility for them. So in terms of blaming men for the rise in single motherhoods, I do find that to be the most convincing point, but the story doesn't end there. Firstly, I think that there's a cultural reignition of interest in what it means to be a man, to be masculine, to take responsibility. This channel is a part of that. I think we're rediscovering and we're getting excited about what it means to be a man, and those traditionally masculine tasks of protecting and providing are resonating with a whole new generation of young people who want to do it, who looked at the male promiscuity, looked at the fuckboy culture and said, no, that's not for me. I actually have family values. I want to be a good father. And while channels and perspectives like mine might not be the mainstream perspective yet, we might still be a bit out on the fringe, I do think that we're making progress in that regard. And in terms of assigning blame, I'm not comfortable partaking in any conversation where collectively women point the fingers at men and say, you're lazy, you're selfish, that's why you're not taking responsibility, it's all your fault. That's simply not true. Women want to act as though they're completely innocent in these circumstances coming about, but trust me, their hands are not clean. First of all, women, you do have some responsibility for the men that you choose to sleep with. Okay, nobody's forcing you to have unprotected sex with men who are irresponsible and immature. If collectively across the world tomorrow, every single woman agreed to only have sex with men who were mature, responsible, who would step up and be amazing fathers, this problem would solve itself overnight. But beyond that, if we acknowledge that there are too many men who are not taking responsibility for the children they create, who are not stepping up and being good fathers, rather than just heaping shame and blame upon them, wouldn't it be more prudent to ask why? Why is this happening? Why aren't men stepping up? Why aren't they taking responsibility? Is there something we can change? Is there something we can help with? Actually, yes, there's a huge amount that we can do. First step, let's actually talk to men and listen to what their responses are. Why aren't you feeling responsible? Why aren't you stepping up? Well, what you'll discover is that from the perspective of masculinity, we view responsibility and authority as coming hand in hand. When you give men authority over something, men naturally step up and start taking responsibility for it. It's my car, I'll make sure I get it serviced. It's my work, I'll make sure I get it done. It's my body, I'll make sure I eat right and do exercise. The things that men have authority over, they take responsibility for. They take good care of them. So hopefully you understand where I'm going with this. If we're seeing men are not taking responsibility for children, it's probably because collectively we don't feel like we have much authority over the children that we create. If you start treating fathers better and giving men more authority, you're going to see naturally a rise in responsibility. It is far too common to come across women in this culture who don't believe that fatherhood is essential. They don't even recognize that masculinity plays a unique role in the upbringing of a child. You see this in divorce battles when it comes to deciding custody, that so many women have that disgusting motherhood entitlement, which believes that as mothers, they are the real parents and the father's just like a supportive parent. I actually encourage you to have this discussion with the women in your life and expect for them to be extremely uncomfortable while you ask them these questions. Ask them deep down, your absolute core, do you believe that mothers and fathers are equal? If they're honest, a lot of women will answer no. Deep down, they believe that mothers are the primary parent. For the first couple of years, especially while breastfeeding, it's actually correct, but beyond that, it's just arrogance. I still find the concept of visitation baffling and quite frankly, offensive. Like the couple splits up and the mother uses the court system to allow the father visitation rights, like the right to visit his own children. What the hell is that? Why are the children hers and not his? And why is it in some jurisdictions that after giving birth to a child, a mother has the legal right to put that child up for adoption unilaterally, regardless of what the man says. How is that okay? How is that possibly justifiable? Or what about situations like in this video where you've got a man who is desperate to be a father, happy to be a single father, but he's powerless to prevent his partner from having an abortion?
No, don't do it.
Daddy, don't do it, baby.
Oh my gosh. It's not right. It isn't right.
I'm such a good dad.
I know.
Men who are desperate to be fathers, willing to be a single parent, willing to do anything, and they're completely powerless. Now, I can understand it is her body, and it would become very problematic if you allowed for men to start, dictating what she's allowed to do, like forcing her to carry the baby to term. Legally, I get that that's incredibly messy. But what really stings is the hypocrisy, because there's absolutely no consistency in this. That man has no say legally in whether or not the child gets aborted or not. Whether the child lives is completely beyond his power. He can't make that decision. Yet, if she decides to keep the baby, he has 100% legal responsibility for it in the terms of child support. It's responsibility without authority. If she can choose to abort the child, why don't fathers have the ability to financially abort the child? The message in all of these situations is clear. Mothers are the real parents. Mothers have the authority, not fathers. No respect, no authority, and we wonder why some men might struggle to take responsibility when the constant cultural message is that they don't count, that they're not real parents. But we're not stuck this way. We can change all of this. Tomorrow, we can all wake up and say, you know what, as a society, we need to start putting children's happiness higher in our value system. We need to say that it's important that they have stable families, 2 parents. It's reasonable to say that as the adults in the room, as the ones in charge, we need to do the mature, responsible things. Sometimes that means sacrificing our own happiness for the sake of those who are in our care. They're powerless to improve their situation, and so we need to take that into account. We need to do everything we can. We need to start valuing fathers, recognize that men are amazing, they're beautiful, that fatherhood is incredible, and it's really important for children that they have that masculine experience, that role model. We need to relieve men of this fear that their children are going to be held hostage against them by awful toxic women. In every single child custody arrangement after a divorce, the default should always be that the children are 50-50 custody of both man and woman, provided they're both willing. The only time there should ever be an exception to that is if it is proved that one of the parents is abusive. And I don't mean based on the woman's say-so, especially when she's hugely biased and looking to hurt the man. I'm saying actual proof. And maybe then when we actually make men feel respected, valued, and we give them some authority as fathers, you might see this problem disappear. You might see men increase their level of responsibility. Then we can actually fix this problem for the sake of those children who deserve 2 parents. Or, rather than actually fixing the problem, we can continue to be ruled by hate and blame. Instead of coming from compassion and looking for a solution, we can just continue the sexist hate train against men. Allow the children to continue to suffer just so women can continue to ride that victimhood high. I mean, it just depends what kind of a society women actually want. Do they want to live in a culture where children are growing up with fathers? Or do they want to live in a society where everything's going wrong, but they can comfortably blame all of that on men? I sincerely mean this when I say, women, if you actually care about your children, I hope you're going to make the right choice.